Welcome to the second installment of this repetitive dive planning tutorial. In this video, we'll continue with the basics that we learned in the first video and build upon that to form a more solid understanding of repetitive dive planning. During this video, I'll move a little faster, so if there's a concept you don't yet understand, I would encourage you to rewatch the first video before continuing. Once again, please have your dive planning worksheet, the NOAA dive table, and a pen or pencil. Now that you're ready, let's begin. For this next example, let's plan a dive to 58 feet for 44 minutes. We'll again start on chart 1 and write our depth and time into our worksheet. Also, since this is our first dive, residual nitrogen time is 0, and our total bottom time is also 44 minutes. Go ahead and write that down in the worksheet too. Now we'll head to chart 1 and locate our intended depth in the left-hand column. You'll notice that there's no box containing 58 feet. Just as we did with time in the first example, we'll use the next greater depth for our planning to allow for a margin of safety. In this case, 60 feet is our next greater depth. We now move to the right and find the box with our dive time. There is no 44, so we choose the box with 45. From here, we move down vertically to chart 2 to find our first pressure group. If you're on track, you should land on pressure group H. If so, go ahead and write that on your worksheet. Now we have a decision to make. How long are we going to stay out of the water? As you may already have noticed, our surface interval is anything but arbitrary. Not only may it be dictated by the situation, boat ride to the next dive site, lunch, or gear issues, but this is the main tool we can use to extend our no decompression limits during repetitive diving. Yes, this means that the longer the surface interval, the longer the next dive, but it might not be that simple. If you want to complete 5 dives in one day, you can't spend as much time as you'd like out of the water between dives because there's only so much time in a day. So, you'll need to plan just the right amount of time for your particular situation. This is really why planning dives ahead of time is so important. You don't want to spend so much time out of the water at the beginning of the day trying to maximize dive time to find that you've run out of daylight for a final dive before making it back to land. In this example, we're only completing 2 dives. So let's plan a surface interval for 2.5 hours. Now, let's write that into our worksheet. Starting at our letter group H, we now trace down until we find the box with times that bracket our surface interval of 2 hours and 30 minutes. In this case, it's the box containing 1 hour and 45 minutes and 2 hours and 37 minutes. We now move to the left to chart 3 to find our post-surface interval pressure group, which should be pressure group F. We then write this into our worksheet. For our second dive, let's plan for 48 feet for 45 minutes, and write this information into our worksheet. The next step is to find our residual nitrogen time based on our current pressure group and our next planned dive. We locate the planned depth at the top of chart 3. Since we are diving to 48 feet, we choose 50 feet for planning purposes. At the intersection of these two values, we'll find our residual nitrogen time. In this example, the residual nitrogen time is 42 minutes. As a reminder, this means that when we start our second dive, we're effectively beginning with a head start or handicap of already being at our planned depth for 42 minutes. So we must add this to our plan and make sure we're still within the maximum no decompression time allowance. First, we write our residual nitrogen time on our worksheet, and then add this to our planned dive time for a total bottom time of 87 minutes. Continuing in clockwise fashion on our dive table, we now return to chart 1 with this information. For the second dive, we use the planned depth of 48 feet, or 50 feet on the chart. At this depth, the first thing to note is our maximum allowable no decompression time. Remember, this is the red number in the circle towards the end of the row. In this case, it's 92 minutes. So, our total bottom time of 87 minutes is allowed. If our plan fell outside of this number, we have 2 choices. We can either plan for a different time, or we can increase our surface interval such that at the end of the surface interval, we fall in a lower, alphabetically that is, pressure group. This would reduce the residual nitrogen in our body, and our head start or handicap would be less. Therefore, when adding to our planned actual bottom time, our new total bottom time would be less and should fall within the allowable limits. Since we are happy with our current plan, we now move across the row to find our total bottom time of 87 minutes, which is 89 minutes on the chart. To then move downward to chart 2 to find our final pressure group. As long as you've done everything correctly, you should end up with a final pressure group of L. We complete our plan by writing this into our worksheet. You now have a full repetitive dive plan for 2 dives. As you learn in your open water course, we always have a plan when diving, and our intention is to dive this plan. However, as in most things, circumstances may change and you may need to adjust your plan. The benefit of having everything written on our worksheet beforehand is that making a change is much easier. The most likely adjustment to the plan will be after the first dive. No matter how skilled you are, the chances of diving to exactly 58 feet and coming up at exactly 44 minutes is slight at best. But that's not a problem. During your surface interval, you should recalculate using the actual depth and time at the end of the first dive. If you went a little deeper or stayed a little longer than the plan, then you may need to adjust your surface interval to be able to dive your second dive as planned. Or, based on weather, you may need to go to a different dive site with a different profile. Additionally, while computers are incredibly useful for scuba diving, they do not give you the flexibility of making a comprehensive dive plan. Once you are comfortable using tables, it becomes easy to quickly plan out a day of diving to maximize your enjoyment. You don't want to be the diver on the boat that follows their computer to the limits on each dive, only to get to the final dive of the day and find that you can only stay on an amazing wreck for 3 minutes because you failed to plan. In an effort to further hone our skills, let's continue with another example. In this example, we'll make a 3-dive repetitive dive plan. As it is our last example, I'll also go through it a little quicker and expect you to fill in your worksheet along the way. I encourage you to pause the video at each step to make sure you have all the information filled in and are following along. If you feel that you already have a pretty good grasp of all that we've talked about, you can challenge yourself with this last example. Once I give you the depth and time for each dive, or surface interval in between, pause the video and try to plan it for yourself. Then resume the video to see if you wrote down the same information that I did. Let's begin. For our first dive, we'll plan a depth of 54 feet for 64 minutes. So now, if you feel up to it, pause the video and find your post-dive pressure group. Then resume the video to see if your results match mine. Alright, we locate our depth on chart 1 at 55 feet. Our total bottom time at 71 minutes, and proceed to chart 2 for our first pressure group. Once on chart 2, we should meet at pressure group K. For our first surface interval, let's choose an hour and a half. Again, go ahead and find your post-surface interval pressure group and then see if my information matches yours. To do this, we find the box containing our surface interval and then proceed to chart 3. On chart 3, we should land on pressure group J. For our second dive, we'll plan 43 feet for a half hour. Now comes the real challenge. With this information, you can pause the video and make it all the way to your post-dive pressure group for the second dive. Try this and resume the video to see how you did. Alright, we first locate 45 feet on chart 3. And then locate the intersection with our pressure group to get our residual nitrogen time. With a residual nitrogen time of 83 minutes and an actual planned bottom time of 30 minutes, you should have a total bottom time of 113 minutes. With this information, we move back to chart 1. Using the conservative rules we have already learned, we trace along 45 feet to the 114 minutes block and proceed to chart 2 to find our post-dive pressure group. If you've done everything right so far, we are both on pressure group M on chart 2. This is the furthest point we ended in our previous examples, and we'll now plan a third dive. Luckily, we'll use the exact same procedure we did for the second dive, so you already know how to do this. All we have to do is choose our second surface interval to proceed. In this case, we'll have a short surface interval of 30 minutes. With this decision made, we use this information to find our new table group on chart 3. In this case, you will notice that we have not changed pressure groups and should still be in pressure group M. Look a little closer at chart 2, and you'll see that for a surface interval less than about an hour, we never change pressure groups. This is a handy little bit of information to have in the back of your head for the rest of your diving excursions to aid with some quick planning. All right, for our final dive, we'll plan to stay at 35 feet for 15 minutes. If you're thinking that this is a really short dive time, you'd be right. Take a quick look on chart 1, and you'll see that the maximum no decompression limit for the shallowest depth of 40 feet is 163 minutes, or almost 3 hours. However, because of our previous dives and relatively short surface intervals, we have built up so much residual nitrogen that we are very limited on time. This is why planning is so important. If we were completing our worksheet the night before, we could get to this point and decide that we wanted to make a longer dive at this site and go back and adjust our plan. Most likely, we would increase our surface intervals. Without planning, we would just get to this point in the day and have no other choice but to make a short dive and possibly miss out on something spectacular that another, more prepared diver would enjoy. For now, let's continue with this example, and then you can go back on your own and see how you'd come up with a better plan. Find 40 feet on chart 3, and then locate the correct residual nitrogen time, for a total bottom time of 151 minutes. We then take this information back around to chart 1 and follow through to chart 2 for our final pressure group. This should be N. This is the end of the final example and the end of this video tutorial. My hope is that you now have a solid grasp of dive planning with tables and are able to use this information to make all of the diving throughout your life safer and more enjoyable. Thank you for watching, and happy diving.